In today's video, I wanted to go through all of Euless Trupter's quests for the Imperial cult featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Euless is in charge of the Almoner missions. That means all of his quests surround collecting donations. Some of these tasks are very straightforward, while others are a little more complex. There are 7 quests, and like most storylines, they ramp up the more you get into it. Euless Trupter could be found in the lower levels of the Imperial chapels, right next to Sinuli and Tunifus. Speaking with the Savant, he introduces himself as well as the work that he does. He calls it fundraising work, and asks if I'm ready to begin. Telling him yes, I'd like to hop on to some of the Almoner projects, he gives me my first job. Euless would like for me to visit the Skyrim mission here in Ebonheart and ask for donations. The goal is 100 gold, and Trupter thinks it should be relatively easy to hit, as the Nords are usually open to giving. Sounding simple enough, I left the chapels in search of the Skyrim mission. To be honest, this was a pretty easy one. However, I did learn a few things in the process. Number 1, I learned that there was a sub-faction in Ebonheart named the Skyrim Mission. They're really just the Nordic embassy to Vardenfell, but still, I had no clue they even existed. The second thing I learned was how the first few quests in the story were structured. Chatting with all of the Nords in their compound, none of them really offered new or engaging dialogue. Asking each one for alms, they happily handed over a handful of septums. 5 gold here, 40 gold there. However, there's always a fat cat, so to speak. Someone who will hand over the most, if not all of the required donation. For example, Haedmir at the Skyrim mission gladly donated 100 gold, the cult's target goal to begin with. Now, lesson number 3 is that if I had bothered to raise their dispositions, each Nord would have donated double their original amount. This is relevant because returning to Euless and reporting in, there are several dialogue options. The 2 that progress the quest are telling him that I reached the goal or that I doubled the goal. I definitely didn't raise enough funds to double it, but I had the option to say so anyways. That's what leads me into the final lesson. For most of Euless's quests, you can actually donate the gold out of your own pocket. So technically, you can just sit in front of Trupter and steamroll through 5 of the 7 quests rather easily. Obviously, I won't do that, but it certainly is an option. As a reward for doubling the donations, Euless gives me high praise and hands me an enchanted item called Shoes of Conviction. The Shoes of Conviction fortify my personality for 10 points for 20 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, Alms from the Skyrim mission. Chatting with Euless again, I asked him for my next job. This time, the Savant wanted me to seek out the Argonian Mission here in Ebonheart and receive a 100 gold donation from them. Trupter warns me though that it might not be as easy as the Skyrim mission. Black March isn't as rich. Even though the Argonians are generous folk, it could be tricky to hit the mark. First, I learned that there's a Nordic embassy in Ebonheart, and now I'm learning there's an Argonian embassy here too. The more you play, I guess. The Argonian Hall is right beside the Nords. Having just done this with the previous quest, I figured it would be a breeze. Well, while it wasn't the same mechanics as the previous one. In fact, something the Almoner questline does quite well is that it tries to keep the mechanics and features as fresh as possible. Nothing is cookie cutter or copy and paste. Speaking with several of the Argonians here and asking for alms, they all said that I had to talk with their leader, Imperial, as they can't help me. So, finding him and asking for a donation, he rebuttals with a very good point. Imperial says that the Argonians respect the Imperial cult. However, they're disappointed in the cult's lack of action. The cult has never supported the Argonians by speaking out against Morrowind's slavery and inhumane actions towards their people. Taking that into account, Imperial apologizes and says that unfortunately, the Argonian mission can't make any donations at the moment. Like I said, a very good point. But you know what gets around it, illusion and artificial charms. Raising Imperial's disposition and trying again, this time he changes his mind. He's still disappointed at the cult's inaction, but flips the ideology of donating on its head. By giving a handsome sum, Imperial is demonstrating that him and his people are committed to bettering the local communities. This is in an effort to disprove the Dark Elves and their insistence that the Argonians are no more than animals. Imperial hands over 200 gold and smashes the donation target out of the park. Now, interestingly, I had no idea this part was tied to the quest. I thought I had just stumbled onto a scene I wasn't supposed to, which is still technically true. There's one other pathway in the Argonian mission. It's a door that leads down into its depths. Here, there's another NPC named Endice, and just past her, there's a flooded area of the hallway. The water is guarded by 2 slaughterfish, no doubt meant to keep the common man out. Defeating them and continuing on my trek, the path eventually leads to a cell door. On the other side is a lone Argonian. Unlocking the door and speaking with the NPC, on one, the plot thickens. On one says that she's afraid, she's hiding, and that I can't tell anyone. When alms for the poor is brought up, one says that she's a runaway slave, and that she's waiting for a boat to take her away from these lands. This gives the player a journal update, and this information can actually be used to blackmail Imkalea into giving the cult its donation. He says that someone else must have brought on one here and disregarded the laws of this land, but it's more than likely an organized effort. In any case, 200 gold in hand, I returned to the Imperial chapels and reported to Ulyss. Telling him that I doubled the goal, he rewarded me with an enchanted item called Zenithar's Frock. Zenithar's Frock is an enchanted shirt, and it fortifies Mercantile for 5 points for 50 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, Alms from the Argonian Mission. Resuming the conversation with Ulyss, he gives me my next job. Trupter says that Fort Buckmoth hasn't hit their mark for collection. These donations are going to be used for purchasing food and supplies for the less fortunate. He urges me to head to Aldrun and to ask around for some more handouts, again with a goal of 100 gold, but we all know that 200 is the real mark. Before leaving, the savant says that this job in particular could be tricky. Since Aldrun is ran by House Redoran, the Dunmer there might not be so compassionate towards the Empire. Well, Ulyss is right on one thing. It seems like the Imperial Shrine has some competition. Heading to Aldrun, pretty much all the Dunmer there say the same thing, that they already donated to the temple. In theory, the temple and the cult are both trying to do the same thing, but each faction more so focuses on their own people and followers. Heading to the temple, even the NPCs inside of there say that they've already given their dues. So, this is where the quest gets pretty interesting. Basically, my objective was to find every single non-Dunmer NPC and ask them for donations. Even by doing that, a fair bit of them just responded by saying that they couldn't help me. Essentially, the 4 places that yielded the best results were the Rat in the Pot, Skyrim, the Mages Guild, and the Fighters Guild. There were a handful of NPCs in each establishment that were more than willing to help out with the cause. The issue though, and not to sound greedy, was that most of them were only giving 1 gold piece. If I was lucky, I'd get 5, and if I was on top of the world, I'd get 10. Eventually, it felt like I had collected donations from every able-bodied NPC, and yet I was still shy at least 100 gold. Well, even though I touched on it before, this was where I actually found out that increasing everyone's disposition meant more money in my hands. What's more, once an NPC is donated, you can't go back and increase their disposition to get the remaining balance out of them. Once the dialogue option's been exhausted, that's it. I also didn't want to pay the difference out of pocket on this one. So I reverted my save and this time did things a little more strategically. Since 200 was the goal, I just paid a visit to the NPCs with the biggest pockets. For starters, Aingoth the jeweler in the Rat in the Pot donated 60 gold, so that was a huge chunk taken care of. Then there was also Lyriel Stoin who forked over 20 septims. Perseus Mercius and Baradris at the Fighters Guild each donated 20 gold too. For the Mages Guild, Edwina Elbert handed over another 20. I also just collected 5 gold from Erinil as she was convenient to get to. Then, the remainder came from various shopkeepers and random NPCs, like Cien Sintiev, the alchemist, Codus Colonus, the bookseller, and Hoki of the Morag Tong. Honestly, this quest was pretty fun for me. It felt like a neat scavenger hunt, and while Morrowind does a great job at not holding your hand, I felt this was an exemplary quest for that. Once all 200 gold was collected, I returned to the Imperial chapels and spoke with Trupter. For going above and beyond, Ulyss rewarded me with 2 scrolls and a skill book. Dedala's Knack charms the target for 0 to 24 points for 30 seconds, Figgy's Gem Feeder soul traps the target for 60 seconds, and the buying game increases the reader's mercantile skill. With that, thus ends the quest, Buckmoth Alms. Resuming the conversation with Ulyss, he got straight into the next quest. For the upcoming Harvest's End pageant, the savant needs to acquire a red shirt with a black vest. This clothing piece is apparently just called a common shirt. In any case, Trupter would like me to ask around the local shops and to see if any of the shopkeepers would be willing to donate one. He suggests that I try cities and towns that have more of a Cyrodiilic influence, so Balmora, Caldera, Pelagiad, or Vivec's Foreign Quarter. It's at this point that the Almoner questline temporarily steps away from monetary donations. While I don't know a whole lot about the Harvest's End pageant, surely a common shirt could be expensed by the cult. They don't need me destroying some poor guy's business in hopes of having everything handed to them for free. Something interesting to note too is that similar to the previous quests, the player can either just go and outright buy a common shirt, or if they find one in the wild or had one on their person to begin with, Trupter would be more than happy to accept it. However, the hunt and chase are the meat and potatoes of this questline, so I figured I'd start my search in Balmora. Locating the clothiers and asking Millie Hastian about the common shirt, she says that she has nothing in that style. However, an Altmer named Falinamo apparently does, and his shop is located in Caldera. Heading to the mining town and seeking out the High Elf, I asked again about the shirt and vest. Let's just say, Falinamo wasn't really in the giving mood. He rhetorically asked if the Imperial cult was too poor to pay him for his work. That's what I was saying too, but hey, we're all about handouts and free things at the faction. Rubbing my hands together, I charmed Falinamo and tried again. Surprise, surprise, this time he was a lot nicer and more generous. He comments on how the common shirt is one of his favorite styles, and how he's fallen for my compliments. The Altmer freely hands over the outfit and even supplies an extra one, plus some tailored trousers. The tailored trousers are actually an enchanted leg piece. They fortify the wearer's personality by 3 points. With the quest item in hand, I returned to Euless and reported my success. This is also the first Almoner quest where there's no bonus reward, as the common shirt was the be-all end-all. I guess though you could count Falinamo's added items as your reward for seeking out a donation as opposed to just paying for them. Now, as a reward from the cult, Trupter hands me a book called A Dance and Fire, Chapter 7. A Dance and Fire is a mercantile skill book. With that, thus ends the quest, Shirt and Vest for Harvest's End. Resuming my conversation with Euless, I asked him for my next job. The savant tells me that the Balmora Shrine is planning some sort of fundraiser at Fort Moonmoth. They've already been able to secure enough food donations, but they've been lacking in the drinks department. Trupter would like for me to secure 5 bottles of Cyrodiilic brandy. Apparently, those attending the party won't settle for anything less than that caliber of drink. They especially don't want anything that the Dunmer brew, grief being one of said spirits. Euless suggests that I try asking around the corner clubs in Balmora, as they have some close ties with the Empire and the cult. Again, what I really like about the Almoner quests is that they keep evolving. Yes, they're fetch quests, they started out really simple, but now they've turned into more elaborate scavenger hunts. It requires talking with the right people and rubbing elbows with the right NPCs. It's quickly become my favorite story arc within the Imperial cult. Heading to Balmora, the first place I went to was the Council Club. Knowing the reputation of this place and that it's frequented by the Kimona Tong, I knew there was a slim chance they'd actually donate to the cause. Lo and behold, I was right. Asking the proprietor, Banor Saren, for donations, he mocked me and the cult and told me to get lost. Even after raising his disposition, he said it a little nicer, but he still rejected my request. Little did I know though that wouldn't be my last time in the Council Club for this mission. In any case, I continued my search by moving to the next establishment, the Lucky Lockup. Coming out the gates by charming Benonius Agrodilius, he reluctantly handed me a bottle of Cyrodiilic brandy. He said what I've been saying all along, that he's being robbed of his profits and comforts, and that the Imperial cult probably has enough money to spare for the bottles. However, that's 1 down and just 4 more to go. The next spot I tried was the 8 plates. Charming Delena Relal and asking for a handout, she recognized that it was a smart move to get into the cult's good graces. You never know when you may need the goodwill of the faction. She donated a bottle to the fundraiser, and that was 1 more ticked off the list. At this point though, I recognized that there was only 1 more tavern in town that I had to visit. Unless they were going to donate 3 bottles, which I didn't think they would, I wondered where the final 2 were going to come from. Well, entering the South Wall Corner Club and speaking with the proprietor, Bacula Clausius, he ends up handing me 1 bottle. He apparently has 2, but he needs the other one for the bar. Before I can even go and scratch my head, Bacula offers up a suggestion on where I could find the remaining 2. Banor Saren at the Corner Club, the rude Dunmer from earlier, apparently has a Cyrodiilic brandy stashed away in the storage room beside the bar. While Clausius feels bad to suggest theft, it's apparently common knowledge that the Corner Club is frequented by the Kimona Tong, and they've got what's coming to them. As we've learned, the Imperial cult really doesn't care where the donated goods come from, they just want them. So, taking Bacula's advice, I re-entered the corner club and snuck around to their storage room. Closing the door behind me, one of the crates did indeed have 5 bottles of brandy. That's more than enough for the cult, and in fact, if I had started with this, I could have been done already. Taking the bottles, I recall to the shrine and report it to Ulyss. Trupter recognizes that this wasn't an easy task, so he gives me a pretty hefty reward. The left and right hands of Zenithar. They're both enchanted gloves. The right hand fortifies the wearer's personality for 5 points, and the left hand fortifies their luck for 5 points as well. With that, thus ends the quest, Brandy for the fundraising dinner. Chatting with Ulyss again, we got straight into the next job. Trupter says that Cunius Pelelius, a higher-up in the Caldera mining company, has pledged to make donations to the cult. However, said donations have never actually been made. His contributions would go a long way for the shrine, as they'd go towards the Widows and Orphans Fund, aka Ulyss's brothel and tavern money. Just kidding, possibly. But the goal for this one is 500 drakes. That's certainly a decent amount. Cunius can be found at the Governor's Hall, and the Savant would like for me to make haste. According to further conversation with Ulyss, Pelelius is part of an exclusive group that received the Imperial Charter to set up operations in the Ebony Mine. This is a very lucrative option, and while 500 gold may seem like a lot, it's but a drop in the bucket for the Caldera Mining Company. Every time a missionary is sent from the shrine, Cunius just blows them off and says that he's very busy. Trupter thinks that this is all a ruse to get the cult off of his back, but Pelelius doesn't know how insistent the faction can be. At this point, there are only 2 quests left for the Imperial Shrine. Up until now, there's been a bit of detective work required for each quest, but in my opinion, these next 2 missions are where the investigative skills really shine. Heading to the town of Caldera and into the Governor's Hall, Cunius Pelelius can be found wandering around the main chamber. Speaking with him, he introduces himself but immediately follows it with a dismissive and rude line. He's unsure why someone like myself thinks that they have business with someone like him. Already off to a good start, I asked about his 500 drake donation. Almost as if it was rehearsed, he said that at the moment he's incredibly busy, but once his affairs are sorted, he'd be open to discussing it at a later date. From here, I have a few options. One is to thank him for his time and leave. Another is to press him for a commitment. Doing so, he says that my quote, views are unwelcome here and that we'll pick this up at a later date. The third option is to demand the money right here and now, but this apparently causes Cunius to attack the player, and that's not where I wanted to go with this. Instead, I'm choosing to extort the poor fellow. Asking around the Governor's Hall, no one really has anything to say regarding the donation. They just all tell you to take it up with Pelelius. However, when the topic of Cunius himself is brought up, everyone gets hush-hush. They're all afraid to say what's on their mind, but they do direct me to someone named Olumba Groboglar. Olumba is apparently an open book, and seeking him out, he shares some pretty juicy rumors. Apparently, Cunius has gotten into some money troubles, likely some problems with balancing the books. In order to pay off said debts, he's been skimming from the mines and smuggling raw ebony. The only witnesses are the slaves who perform the labor there, but they might not be so open to sharing what they've seen. Either way, with a lead to follow, I shot straight for the mining camp. Out of curiosity, I tried asking the workers there, but they all said that they'd hate to make an enemy out of Cunius Pelelius. I then tried asking some of the slaves in the shacks, like Delina and Cassina, but they chose to be silent on the topic. So, heading into the mines themselves, I located an Argonian by the name of Gilm. Asking Gilm about the smuggling and Cunius, she too chose not to reveal anything. However, after raising her disposition, the Argonian began to talk. Gilm said that it was all true. Cunius comes at night and takes from the deposits. Everyone's seen him do it too, but they're all afraid to speak out against him. With a solid confession, I returned to the Governor's Hall and confronted Pelelius with this accusation. This time there were a few more dialogue prompts. One of them was to threaten him with the skimming, and the other was to bring up the slave's confession. Choosing the latter, it was enough to scare Cunius into submission. Realizing what was going on here, Pelelius gave in to the blackmail and handed me 3 samples of raw ebony. While he may not have the gold at the moment, he thinks that the ebony can fetch a decent price, and it'll be more than the pledged 500 gold donation. Now, this next part ultimately depends on the player's personality, mercantile skill, and the trader's disposition. It is possible to sell each one for their estimated value of 200 gold, but you have to work the markets a bit or else it comes out of your own pocket. Now, quickly reverting back, there is one other option for completing this quest, and it's a lot quicker than getting a confession. Back at the Governor's Hall, on the second floor, there's a little side room that contains a locked chest belonging to Odril Helvi. If this chest sounds familiar, that's because it was related to a quest from the House Redoran storyline. And guess what? The secret Caldera Ledger is the exact same quest item. Cracking it open, the book simply says that a lot of the money is going to something called the Ashlands Management Fund. Whatever that is, it's not sanctioned by the Duke of Vardenfell. Bringing this ledger to Cunius, the exact same dialogue ensues. He gives in to the player's blackmail and hands you 3 samples of raw ebony to sell. Whichever method is chosen, once the 500 gold has been secured, it's time to recall back to the Imperial chapels. Speaking with Ulyss, he was ecstatic at my accomplishment. Many before me have failed, so that's what he uses to justify this pretty generous reward. Trupter gifts me 6 different scrolls. Elevrim's Sty blinds the target for 0 to 50% for 30 seconds. Lord Maz's Revenge conjures a complete set of bound armor for 60 seconds. Savage Might fortifies strength for 1 to 30 points for 60 seconds. The Gambler's Prayer fortifies luck for 15 to 45 points for another 60 seconds. Alvusia's Warping dispels 100 to 200% in 1 foot on touch, and Black Despair damages willpower for 5 to 15 points for 10 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest. Donation from Cunius Pelelius. Chatting with Ulyss once more, he gave me my final task as an Almoner. Someone by the name of Canctunian Ponius of the East Empire Company has promised to sponsor an Ashlander mission. The cult needs at least a 1,000 septim donation, as it will be a pretty expensive expedition. Even though Ponius pledged the money, the cult hasn't received anything. This isn't like Canctunian though, as he's a man of faith and of his word. Trupter wants me to seek him out in the East Empire Company's office here in Ebonheart and to personally ask for the donation. As I said before, this is the final quest for the Almoner section, so you know it's going to be exceptional. I will say though, without trying to spoil anything, I felt as though the last one was a bit more challenging. However, if the player has been paying out of pocket to steamroll through this questline, 1,000 gold is where it gets pretty steep, so it may not be the wisest choice to do so here. Heading into the EEC's office, I located Ponius in the back room and spoke with him. He introduced himself as the Factor-in-Chief and asked if I was here regarding the generous pledge. Telling him yes, Canctunian confides in me and tells me the truth. He can't keep his pledge at the moment because recently, one of the EEC's clerks embezzled funds. In order to avoid a scandal, Ponius is keeping it hush-hush, and he's been reimbursing the company out of his own pocket. From here, I have 2 options. The first is to thank him for his time and walk away. This could be in order to just pay the 1,000 donation out of my pocket to Ulyss. That way, I'd be done with this story arc. The other option is to offer my help with tracking down the clerk who stole the money. Wanting to see this quest through, I of course chose the latter. Ponius gladly accepts the offer and offers me details in return. The thief's name is Mosanin. He's a high elf and he stole about 3,000 septims. Before he stole the funds, Mosanin was apparently showing up less and less for work. While Canctunian wasn't all that close with him, he suggests that I ask the other staff members for further details, as they all work together. The first NPC I tried was the orc Shazgob Groluzgan. Luzgan was more than willing to tell me about Mosanin. He was apparently hardworking at first, but just like that, the Altmer became unreliable. Rumor has it that the High Elf frequently visited the Mages Guild in the foreign quarter of Vivec. At first, no one knew how he could afford teleporting so often, but now it all makes sense. The other NPC I chatted with was the Argonian, Oakenshay. Shay's details are a little different to Luzgan's. The Argonian believed that Mosanin had a Telvanni girlfriend. He kept their relationship a secret, but Oakenshay has seen them from time to time in the foreign quarter of Vivec. From here, there are a couple of leads to follow. First and foremost, it's time to head to Vivec, more specifically the Mages Guild. Then I should start thinking about a Telvanni woman and where she might reside. It could be the Telvanni canton, or it could be one of their eastern villages. Within the Mages Guild, I was able to speak with someone named Malvin Ramori and ask about Mosanin. She said that he was in here not long ago, and he sought out the guild guide Flacasia Faucius. Heading to Flacasia, she then says that Mosanin frequently teleports between here and the Wolverine Hall. Plus, he's been spotted with a Telvanni woman on numerous occasions. So, heading to the hall myself, I spoke with someone named Ariel Fanil, and she gave me the final lead. She said that a high elf has been teleporting around with the Sadrithmora local Volmini Dral. She has a house near the hall. Interestingly, I guess Oakenshe's description stood out to her, as she goes out of her way to call Dral young but not very attractive, whatever that's worth. Leaving the hall, there are only a couple of pods near the fort, and lo and behold, one of them is Volmini Dral's. Entering her home, the Dunmer was standing near the doorway. Chatting with her, I immediately asked about Mosanin. Fortunately, Dral was very brief and forthcoming. She says that the Altmer lives here with her, and that they're, quote, very close friends. Somebody ought to relay that to Mosanin. We'll see what he does with the money then. Ascending the stairs, I finally laid eyes on the man of the hour, Mosanin himself. Speaking with him, he asks what I want, and I get straight into it. Bringing up the embezzled funds, the Altmer comes clean. He says that he took the money because he thought that Volmini would like him more if he was rich. He's since found out that that isn't the case. Again, somebody ought to tell him that he's in the friend zone. However, Mosanin has already spent 500 septums of the stolen money. He's able to pay back 2,500 gold, but needs time to make up the remainder. The High Elf pleads with me not to say anything to Ponius regarding his whereabouts, as he'll be arrested and separated from Volmini. Here, I have a few options. One is to demand the gold and make no promises. 2 is to make the promise and take the money. And 3 is to back out to consider the offers. Choosing 1, because I wanted to tattle on this man so bad, I asked for the money and told him I couldn't make any promises. Since Mosanin's disposition was high enough, this option worked. He recognized that he was in no place to make demands, and he just asked that I consider his situation. With 2,500 gold in hand, I recalled to Ebonheart and brought it to the EEC office. Chatting with Ponius about the embezzled funds, I have the options to lie about how much I received and to only hand him a portion of the recovered money. However, choosing to just give him the full 2,500, Canctunian was saddened to see the full amount couldn't be recovered. Yet, he was able to cut his losses and still hand over the pledged 1,000 drakes. Taking the donation back to Euless, the savant thanks me for all that I've done and rewards me with something called Zenithar Whispers. Trupter says that he has no more work for me, and he tells me to look to the shrine sergeants and lay healers. He also says that if I'm up for it, I should seek out the Latiavarian, as she has oracle quests for me to do. As for Mosanin and his little secret, he lucked out. I couldn't get the dialogue option to rat on him, so for now, he stays smitten with his partner. Finally, Zenithar Whispers is an enchanted amulet, and it charms the target for 30 points for 5 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, pledge from Canctunian Ponius, and that wraps up all of the Almoner missions. Overall, I enjoyed Euless Trupter's story arc. Obviously, these were all variations of fetch quests, and I know a lot of people aren't that into them. Normally, I'm not either, but as the quests went on and started to develop more story and life to them, I started to get more hooked. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that the quests that are done really well and don't have violence attached to them are some of my favorites. In a world based around plundering, looting, and killing, it's nice to see the other side from time to time. The, quote, corporate world of Tamriel, if you will. The world of negotiations, deals, promises, bargains, mystery, investigation. When done properly, it's all very interesting, and to me, surpasses the standard dungeon crawl. While the lay healer storyline was all about alchemy and restoration, and the shrine sergeants dealt with combat and adventure, the Almoners were all about speechcraft, persuasion, and charm. It's something that you see more of in Morrowind than the other Elder Scrolls titles, but that's just because Morrowind does it so well. All in all, at this point, the Almoner storyline is my favorite, but who knows, that could easily change with the Oracle quests, as those are up next.